Hi, I'm Jasper Mund.
And I'm Aaron Salcido.
Today, we're going to take a moment and look closely into the Carlisle Indian Industrial School.
Specifically, whereas we'll be discussing the location, establishment, development, recruitment, and education system of this boarding school.
The boarding school was established in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which was spearheaded by Captain Richard Henry Pratt, who served in the Civil War, where he led the Buffalo Soldiers in the southern plains of the United States. Lieutenant Pratt later then became the founder and superintendent of the boarding school. Before the boarding school had gone under its development, Pratt lobbied with politicians for support of the school, as he had often visited Washington and yet entertained dignitaries at Carlisle. The boarding school had officially started in 1879 and concluded the form of its boarding school in 1918. In 1893, United States legislators authorized the Bureau of Indian Affairs to withhold rations, clothing, and other annuities from Indian parents or guardians who refused or neglected to send and keep their children of proper age in school. Pratt believed that the Native Americans were equals, but that their societies were inferior. Pratt had a 6-point plan for civilization, which included:
The first point was impartial justice toward Native Americans. The second one, regulated buying of Native American lands. The third, promotion of commerce.
4. Promotion of experiments to civilize or improve Native American society. 5. Presidential authority to give presents. And 6. Punishing those who violated Native American rights.
Native American children were enrolled into the boarding school from the extent of 3 to 10 years. This effort, led by the U.S., was launched as a cultural genocide where children were separated from their families in the transition of being enrolled into the boarding school. Followed by the recruitment of the boarding school, many of the first young Native Americans volunteered themselves through the persuasion of Lieutenant Pratt. However, it later became a misconception toward Native Americans. The first tribe of the young Native Americans were from the Lakota. In time, enrollment had increased to the max of 1,000 students. Nonetheless, more boarding schools in their development was under the BIA agency of the federal government, which of course was the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which enacted the cooperation of Native American families to send their children to these boarding schools.
This type of education system was created specifically to Americanize the Native American children.
There was one particular system that they had included with the curriculum of education, which was the outing system. Some Carlisle students were sent to live with non-Indian families to Americanize them during the summer. The curriculum were broken down into 2 different areas. The school structured it half-day academics and half-day trades. Of course, significantly, half-day of academics consisted with reading, writing, and arithmetic. Specifically with half-day trades, for boys, they were involved in carpentry, tinsmithing, and blacksmithing. For girls, cooking, baking, sewing, laundry, and domestic arts.
Now, we'll hand it off to our co-anchors, Alyssa and Araceli.
Go.
Thank you, Jasper and Aaron. My name is Alyssa Aguilar, and I'm here with my colleague.
My name is Araceli Garza, and Alyssa and I are going to be discussing whether or not Native American boarding schools were successful.
So, like Jasper and Aaron previously stated, not only were the Native Americans' lives changed by the strict enforcement of education, but they also had many new traditions, such as their daily routines. For example, they were up at 5:45 in the morning, they had 5 minutes to brush their teeth, a half an hour to eat, and along with other duties throughout their day, and they were asleep at 9 o'clock on the dot. This was enforced every day of the week. Also, their attire was changed. The males wore one-colored uniforms that were button-up and long-sleeve with pants, and the females wore confined dresses with tight-fitting shoes. Their hair was also pulled back or in a tight ponytail. Absolute freedom of religious belief, but all students were expected to attend church.
Among many of these new lifestyle changes that were forced upon the children, they were also required to adapt to a new diet, which was often not much at all, which left these children malnutrition and undernourished. At Round Lake School in 1929, breakfast consisted of 3 tablespoons of porridge, bread, lard, and tea. That was all. The children often would weigh less than when they actually entered the school. The Child Welfare League of America reported on average expense per white child in a residential institution could range anywhere from $313 to $541 annually. In 1928, Merriam Report concluded that only as little as 9 cents a day were being spent on the Native American children in the boarding schools. That's only a total of $32.85 a year. The government thought even that was too much money, and these children were also referred to as Uncle Sam's stepchildren. The quality of food was also a serious issue. There were many accounts of bug-bitten food and spoiled food, which concluded in the students becoming very ill. Another more serious problems were overcrowding in the dormitories and classrooms, lack of privacy for students, inadequate areas for study and recreation, unappealing meals, and rules that would often irritate the older students by their rigid enforcements.
And this was not the only unhealthy mistreatment the children received, but their health was at risk the moment they came in contact with the non-natives. Some students were stricken with tuberculosis and smallpox. Others could not cope with severe stress of separations from their families or their tribes. Most children who got ill were sent back to their families, although some died at Carlisle boarding school, and they were buried there. Sicknesses were not the only reason some children passed away. Torture and abuse played a big factor.
Some of the torturous things that the children had to go through were having sewing needles pushed through their tongues as soon as they were caught speaking Indian. At some schools, it was reported that 100% of the students were sexually abused, and oftentimes students showing signs of emotional distress, such as bedwetting, were often punished by having their faces rubbed in human excrement or being forced to parade around with wet sheets draped over their faces. This had many serious results for the Indians today.
So, nearly 12,000 children attended Carlisle boarding school from all over the United States. Less than 8% graduated, and over 16% ran away.
Because that's a C. Okay.
Now, in present time, this is what Native Americans have to cope with because of their experience at this boarding school. Lowered self-esteem, emotional numbing, somatic disorder, chronic depression and anxiety, often phobic, insomnia and nightmares, dissociation, paranoia, sexual dysfunction, heightened irritability, and the tendency to fly into rages. Suicide was also a big factor that they had to cope with. Victims of rape, torture, hostage taking, domestic violence, and child abuse.
So in conclusion, after elaborate research, we feel that these boarding schools were successful to Americans in their mission to Americanize the native tribes. However, in doing so, caused a mass cultural genocide among the Native American culture. Thank you for tuning in. This is Alyssa and Araceli, checking out for EBC Insider Look.